Hey guys, Mike here. In this video, I'm going to explain how I would approach attempting Ultimaniac mode and in the arcade mode for Final Fantasy 16. Right here, I mapped out most of the enemy squads that you face in every single level. And my first tip would be to do the shorter levels first. So the shortest levels are actually Nice, which only has 3 enemy squads, and the Ironworks, which only has 3 enemy squads. Now, the reason you want to do these ones first is because you don't want to do an Ultimaniac run and then die on the 14th out of 15th leg and then lose all your progress. But there's also another reason why I recommend doing these, is because they're so short, they allow you to test out different skills and different builds, and they're just such a nice environment to test things out. Because in Nice, you have 2 waves of enemies that are just small enemies, so you can test out your AoE and your multi-target skills and your multi-target strategies, see if it even works. And the final boss of Nice is just a single enemy, which is the Panther. And when you fight the Panther, it doesn't have any small enemies around it. So that's where you can see I color-coded different squads. So if it's a yellow squad, that means it's just a standard squad of small enemies with no gimmicks attached, right? So I just have, there's 2 casters and melee unit. Then you can see if it's color-coded in red, that means there's a boss type enemy, an enemy that you actually have to stagger and has hyper armor. Now, if we go to Ironworks, here, you can see I have yellow squads, right, of just small enemies, but I also have this squad here, which is, it says champion plus race. So orange means that it's a boss type enemy combined with fodder units, just small units. Now, why did I color code it like this? The reason I color coded this is because the type of enemy squad that you face greatly dictates how you approach the combat situation. For yellow, just small enemies, they're pretty straightforward. You try to group up the enemies and then just try to annihilate them with your AoEs. But as you can see, when they throw in a champion into the mix with a bunch of small enemies, then you can't just AoE them. You have to respect the champion because he has a stagger meter and he's also going to be aggroing you. So you approach those a little differently. And in a future video, I'll go about how to approach this specific combat situation, which is one of the harder combat situations. You can see, like in this combat situation for Rosalith, which is purple, it's basically 2 boss type enemies that you're fighting at the same time with no small fry enemies. See, Dreg's Head has a Lich and a Golem, which is very unique combat situation. And again, in future videos, I'll explain how to approach combat when you're fighting 2 boss type enemies. And lastly, I have color coded in green here are enemies that cast Cure, which basically delete your score. So if you're going for high scores, then these are the specific stages you want to be careful about. And you really want to burst down those cure bots. You can see in this cell here, I have Bravery plus Chocobos. And the reason, and normally it would be yellow, but the reason it's orange is because Bravery essentially turns small enemies into boss type enemies because they won't get staggered. So it's not as simple a combat situation as just like fighting a yellow small fry enemies. The reason you want to understand all of the combat situations is because it greatly dictates the loadout that you bring to the fight. So let's talk about Ironworks for a second. I'm going to tell you an easy way to get S rank in Ironworks. All you got to do is just equip Will of Wikes and Flare Breath. And there's so many enemies, you'll get like a ton of collateral rainbow points by just grouping up all the enemies with Flare Breath. So there you go. There's your easy S rank for the Ironworks for Ultimaniac and even Final Fantasy mode. Now, you're not going to bring Flare Breath against a level that has a lot of boss type enemies, right? Because bosses won't get staggered by the Flare Breath and they're just going to him slap you out of your Flare Breath. So that's where you bring a different build. So understanding, like I said, again, reiterating the point, understanding the different enemies that you're fighting really dictates the build and the loadout that you bring to each level. Another good example is Drake's Breath. Now, I didn't map out all of the enemy squads yet for this, but I already know Drake's Breath has a lot of range type enemies. So instead of bringing Raging Fists or Rook's Gambit to that fight, you're probably going to bring Heat Wave. Heat Wave is probably goated for this level. Now that you've tested your different loadouts or your different combat situations on either Nice or the Ironworks, then you can start to expand to the different levels and take on different levels. So for example, you can go to Eye of the Tempest, where you just fight Garuda as Clive and then you fight Garuda as Ifrit. And this is a good one because it's a short level and it gives you experience in fighting Ultimaniac as a fully primed Ifrit combined with a large boss type enemy. Again, we're trying to go for short levels that we're not wasting our time, and we're also trying to maximize the amount of combat experience that we gain in Ultimaniac mode. And okay, the next one you can go about doing is the King's Wall. This one's a pretty short level. It's a pretty standard level. Then most of this level is just bosses combined with small enemies, so you can practice those type of combat situations. Like I said, those are pretty tough to deal with on Ultimaniac. And then finally, it has a Dragoon plus a Wyvern, and this should actually be purple because technically it's 2 boss type enemies. So after we do Cosnice and the Ironworks, we're going after short levels that we can complete. Eventually, and then you can go after slightly longer levels. So Greatwood is a good example. Then you can go after even longer levels like Caer Norvin. And then I think the longest level in the whole game is actually the Crystalline Dominion. This one has 15 legs, I believe, and it's a pure gauntlet. For this one, you're really going to have to optimize your limit break usage, so you never want to overcap on limit break, because limit break actually heals you, and it's going to be a significant source of healing in Ultimaniac mode, because you pretty much have no potions. This one's going to be a pain to deal with. It's 15 legs, then you have to fight Bahamut after in his multiple phases. So this one is so long. I think it's probably the hardest one in all of Ultimaniac mode, just because it's a pure endurance gauntlet. I think Ultimaniac mode is doable by a lot of people. It's just overwhelming if you just try to do it straight from Greatwood, Caer Norvin, like in the order of the game. But I think if you go in this order that I recommended, starting with Cosnice and Ironworks, then increasing to the levels that are slightly longer, just to not overwhelm you, while at the same time creating specific builds to address the different types of squads that the levels send at you, then you will beat Ultimaniac mode. I think a lot of people can do Ultimaniac mode. So subscribe if you want to see future videos on how to handle these different types of enemy squads, like the yellow, the orange, the red, the purple, and the green squads. And I might even make full guides on how to handle each level. Like, I already told you how to do Ironworks and Cosnice. Ironworks just use Flare Breath, Cosnice prioritize multi-target, and then the Panther is just super easy to kill. Anyways, hope you enjoyed that video, and thanks for watching.